Evan walks through enormous halls made of frozen crystal. Strange symbols glow. He sees statues of past rulers, each one rumored to have executed offenders with a single touch. Whispers follow him. Humans are fragile. He won't last. She has been cold since birth, inside and out. Evan enters her private wing, where the temperature drops so low that even his thermal suit begins to fail. Princess Aria waits beside a frost-covered throne. She studies him with cold, unreadable eyes. Instead of punishing him, she asks a strange question. "Human, why did your instinct make you reach for me instead of saving yourself?" Evan explains the slip, the fall, and the accident, but she doesn't blink. She steps closer, touching his hand with her ice-cold fingers. She feels something unusual. He doesn't freeze. This shocks her. Every living creature freezes when she touches them, except him. Aria now believes he carries something rare, maybe ancient, something dangerous or precious. She orders everyone out, door seals shut. She says, "Human Evan Cole, I need your help, and if you refuse, this entire palace may die." Welcome to my channel Sci-Fi, Love Story. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe. Evan Cole moved through the frozen palace of Virex 9 with careful steps, because every wall and floor shined like a sheet of living ice, and even the air felt sharp against his skin, and he could see his breath forming tiny clouds that drifted slowly away from his face, as if the cold wanted to steal everything warm inside him, and he felt very small in this place, because the halls stretched so far he could not see the end, and the tall frozen pillars looked like giants watching him and judging him as he passed. And he kept telling himself to stay calm, because he was here on a peace mission, not a war mission, and humans were supposed to show respect to the Coldborn Empire rulers who lived here. And if he messed up even once, he had heard stories that no human would ever leave these halls again, and that thought followed him like a shadow that would not leave no matter how hard he tried to ignore it, and the translator machine he carried was heavy and slippery in his gloves, and he wished it was lighter because the cold made his hands numb, and he kept adjusting his grip as he walked because he feared that dropping it would mean the end of the peace mission, and maybe his life too. And the guards who followed him kept their glowing blue eyes on him without blinking, and he could feel their suspicion as if it pressed on his back, and he tried not to turn around because he knew it would only make him more nervous. And then the worst thing that could happen happened because the floor beneath his boots was pure ice, and his foot slipped and his body tilted sharply forward before he could stop himself, and the heavy machine pulled him faster as it slid out of his grip, and all he could do was try to catch himself from falling on his face, but his hands found something soft and cold, and he froze completely because he knew he had touched a person, not a wall, and he turned in slow horror, and saw that his hand rested on the cold, smooth, curved shape of the Cold Princess Aria's butt, and his heart almost stopped because he knew what the legends said about her. That she was colder than the storm winds on the dark side of Virex 9, that she could freeze living things with a single touch, that she had never allowed any creature to stand too close to her without fear. And now, he had touched her in the worst way possible, in the most insulting way possible, and he wished the ice floor would open and swallow him before the guards decided to cut him down where he stood. And the silence that filled the huge hall felt heavier than any weapon, because everyone stopped moving, and even the light shining through the crystal walls seemed to pause, and the guards drew their cryo spears, and the cold mist rising from their blades made the air tremble around them. And Evan knew he would not survive this moment, and he tried to pull his hand back, but he was too afraid to move, and his breath stuck in his throat as Princess Aria herself turned her head slightly to look at him, her silver eyes glowing like stars trapped in ice, and he waited for his body to freeze or shatter or fall apart, but nothing happened, and instead she stepped toward him slowly in a way that made the temperature drop even lower, and he swore he felt frost forming on his eyelashes, and she stood so close he could feel the cold radiating from her skin like a living force. And she spoke in a calm, sharp voice that cut through the silence like a blade. "Prepare yourself, and come to my quarters, human," and every guard flinched, because no one had ever heard her say such words, not to anyone and certainly not to a human, and Evan felt his stomach twist because being summoned to the quarters of the Cold Princess was not an honor, it was a death sentence, because the stories said that anyone who went in never came out again, and the guards looked at him with something like pity mixed with fear, and even they seemed too afraid to approach her, but they formed a path for him, and he followed them because he had no choice. And as he walked behind them, he could hear the whispers rising from the palace staff who had watched everything happen, and their voices echoed off the frozen walls like wind through a cave. He touched her. How is he alive? She will destroy him. Why would she call him to her chambers? And Evan wished he did not hear any of it because every word made his heart beat louder, and his chest felt tight, and he tried to breathe normally. But the air was so cold it stung his lungs, and the guards led him through corridors that grew darker and colder with every step, and the floor began to glow with faint blue patterns that reacted to the princess aura behind him, even though he could not see her. He could feel the cold following like a living shadow, and his fear kept growing, because he knew he was walking deeper into her domain, far from any chance of escape. And the guards finally stopped in front of a set of huge crystal doors covered in frost and ancient markings, and they opened slowly with a loud groan that sounded almost alive, and inside everything shimmered with a pale blue glow, and the temperature dropped so fast Evan had to brace himself, and he stepped in alone because the guards stayed outside and closed the doors behind him, leaving him trapped inside the private chambers of the Cold Princess. And he stood silent because the room was unlike anything he had ever seen. The walls looked like they were made from frozen starlight, and strange symbols flowed under the surface, as if they were alive, and the air was so cold it made his skin burn, and he could feel the frost creeping over his boots, as if the room itself wanted to swallow him. And then she appeared from the far corner, moving smoothly like a shadow of ice, her silver hair drifting slightly as if touched by invisible wind, and she watched him with an expression he could not read, and he felt like prey caught in the gaze of a predator. But she still did not freeze him, and that confused him even more, and she walked closer, and every step she took made the air colder and colder until it felt like needles piercing his skin, and he wondered how she could survive in such a place, and he wondered how long he could survive here, and she stopped just steps from him and studied him with those bright, cold eyes, and she reached out her hand and touched his wrist, and he felt the cold explode through him like a winter storm, and he fell to one knee because the shock was too strong. But even with all that cold, he did not freeze, and she pulled her hand back in surprise because she could feel the truth. He was not affected by her deadly ice, not in the way others were, not in the way nature demanded, and the shock on her face was so real it broke through her perfect calm, and she spoke again, her voice lower and softer but still sharp. Human, why did you reach for me instead of saving yourself? And he told her he slipped, he fell, and it was an accident, but she did not look satisfied with the answer because she believed something else was at work, something older, something hidden, and she walked around him slowly, studying him from every angle as if he were some strange artifact. And then she ordered the air doors to seal, and the cold symbols on the walls locked into place, and he knew he was truly trapped now. And she stood tall and strong in front of him, her presence colder and heavier than ever before, and she said, "Human Evan Cole, you touched me, and you did not die, and that means something. Ancient has awakened in you, something my people once feared or worshipped, and now I must know what power you carry inside your warm body, because if I do not understand it, this entire palace may fall and the world above us may break, and the ice under our feet may awaken to swallow everything." And Evan felt his skin crawl because her words did not sound like a threat, they sounded like a warning of something far worse, something he did not understand. And she stared at him with those bright eyes that seemed to see through his soul, and she said, "You will help me, human, and you will follow me deeper into the cold, or you will die before dawn." And Evan felt the weight of her words pressing on him like a mountain. And he realized that touching her was not the beginning of trouble, it was the beginning of something far bigger and far more dangerous than he ever imagined. And part one ends with that cold truth sinking into his heart as she turns away and opens a hidden passage of glowing frost waiting for him to follow into the unknown depths below the palace, where something ancient sleeps and stirs and calls her name in voices made of ice and hunger. Evan followed Princess Aria into the hidden passage as the frost-covered walls opened before her touch, and the cold inside the tunnel felt even stronger than in her chambers, as if the air itself wished to stop any warm-blooded creature from entering, and he could feel the ice creeping along his boots as he stepped forward. But he kept moving, because he knew he had no other choice, and Aria walked ahead of him with a calm, silent grace that made the cold around her spin like a living storm, and he wondered how she moved through this place with such ease. But then he remembered that this frozen world was her home, and she was born from the deepest cold, and now he had to follow her even if his body screamed for warmth. and the tunnel grew darker with every step, until the walls began to glow with faint silver lines that moved like veins, and the sound of distant rumbling echoed through the stone. And Aria finally spoke without turning her head, saying the ancient ice awakens human, and if we do not reach it in time it will break. Free and the world above will fall into endless winter, and Evan felt fear rising again, because he could not understand why he of all people had to be part of this, why, she believed. He held some hidden power when he felt nothing but shaking cold in his bones, but Aria continued forward without pause, and the tunnel opened into a massive cavern filled with huge frozen pillars that stretched high into the darkness, and the air here felt alive with cold energy that pushed against his chest and made it hard. Breathe, and Aria stopped at the edge of the cavern and raised her hand, and the ice under their feet began to shift, pulling away to reveal a staircase leading downward. And she said we go to the shard chamber, where the source of all Coldborn power sleeps, and Evan swallowed hard and followed as the stairs spiraled deep into the earth, and strange shadows moved inside the ice walls like frozen memories trying to escape. And when they reached the bottom, Evan saw something so huge, he nearly forgot to breathe because the chamber held a massive crystal structure that glowed with icy light, and its surface cracked slowly like a heartbeat made of winter, and Aria stepped toward it and said, "This is the eternal shard, the heart of my world, and the prison of the ancient spirit that once ruled the ice before my people." And Evan asked what woke it, and she replied, "The balance was broken when I touched you, and yet you did not freeze, and now the shard senses something new, something warm, and something it fears." And Evan felt a chill deeper than the cold around him because something ancient was reacting to him, and the shard pulsed again, sending ripples of frost across the floor, and Aria stepped closer, placing her hand on the crystal. But the surface cracked violently, sending shards of ice flying and forcing her back, and a roar echoed inside the chamber like the cry of a beast trapped for ages. And Evan covered his ears, because the sound felt like knives in his mind. And Aria said, "The spirit is breaking free, we must act now." And she reached for his hand, and that shock of cold flooded through him again. But he did not freeze, and she closed her eyes, allowing her power to flow through him. And he felt his warmth draining into the shard like fire being pulled into a storm. And the crystal light grew brighter and brighter until he could hardly see. But then a huge crack burst across the shard, and from the opening a massive shape of swirling frost and ghostly mist formed, rising into the air with a terrible howl. And the temperature plunged so low Evan felt his limbs stiffen, and ice formed on his hair and clothes, and Aria stepped in front of him, raising her hands as a shield of ice formed around them. But the spirit struck it with a wave of freezing wind that shattered the shield and sent both of them sliding across the frozen ground. And the spirit spoke in a voice like breaking stone, saying, "Child of ice, you cannot hold me, I am the first winter, the endless storm." And Aria struggled to stand as frost crawled up her legs, but she shouted back, "You were sealed for a reason, Ancient One, and I will not let you destroy my world." And Evan rose slowly, even though the cold bit at every part of him, and he saw his tools scattered on the ground, and remembered the thermal energy pack inside his suit. And he suddenly realized that his warmth might be the key, and he activated the pack, causing heat to surge through his chest. And the ancient spirit shrieked as the warm light pushed back its icy tendrils, and Aria looked at him with surprise and something like hope as Evan stepped forward, holding his hand out toward the spirit, and the warmth in him burst brighter than before because Aria placed her hand on his back, channeling her own power to amplify his heat. And the spirit screamed and recoiled as the combined force of human warmth and Coldborn power pushed it back toward the shard. And the chamber shook violently as ice cracked and reformed. And Evan felt his strength fading because the heat drained from him faster than he could handle, but Aria steadied him, saying, "Do not stop, human, the spirit must not return to the world above." And together, they pushed with all their strength until the spirit lost its form and collapsed back into the shard, and the crystal glowed brilliantly, sealing shut with a final crack that echoed through the cavern, and Evan collapsed to the floor, shaking from exhaustion and cold, and Aria fell beside him, weakened, but still holding his arm, and the chamber slowly grew quiet again, except for the soft hum of the sealed shard. And Aria turned her head to look at him, her silver eyes dim, but still filled with strength. And she said, "You saved my world, human Evan Cole." And he could only breathe weakly because his body felt drained and heavy, and Aria reached for him, gently lifting him in her cold arms, even though the contact should have frozen him, but somehow it did not. And she carried him back up the long frozen tunnels, her steps slow but steady, and he drifted in and out of consciousness, hearing only her cold voice whispering, "You will not die, you cannot die, not now." And when they reached her chambers, she placed him on a bed made of soft, cold light, and she waited beside him watching until his eyes opened again, and he saw her expression change in a way he had never seen before, softer, warmer. Even though she was born of ice, and she said, "Human, you are the only one who can touch me without fear, and you are the only one who can stand at my side against the ancient storms." And Evan tried to sit up, but she placed her cold hand on his chest, holding him gently, and she said, "You are my chosen warm bearer now, and the palace will not understand at first, but they will obey, and all of Virex 9 will know that the human who touched the Cold Princess lives, because he carries a power even the ancient spirit." Fears, and Evan looked at her, unsure if he should feel honored or terrified, and she leaned closer, her cold breath brushing his skin as she whispered, "After what we survived, you will come to my quarters again, and soon." And she stood gracefully, and the frost around her shimmered like stars, and Evan felt the world shift, because he knew his life had changed forever, and he knew the Cold Princess was not done with him, and the fate of her world, and maybe his own now, rested on the strange, warm power inside him, the power that made him the only human who could walk beside her, and the only human she would ever allow near her. And the chamber grew quiet as she watched him with unreadable eyes, waiting for him to recover, waiting for the next step of their strange bond to begin. Evan woke slowly, as if rising from a deep, cold dream, and when his eyes opened, he saw the soft blue glow of the princess' private chamber, and he felt heat returning to his body little by little, as if someone had wrapped him in a warm blanket of light. But he soon realized it was not a blanket, but Aria herself, sitting beside him, her cold aura gentler than before. And she watched him in silence with eyes that held both relief and something deeper, something she did not show to others, and he tried to sit. But his muscles ached from the battle, and he fell back onto the soft bed, and Aria raised her hand, and the air obeyed her, forming a smooth sheet of frost over him to hold him steady. And she said, "Rest, human. You pushed your warmth beyond its limits, and your body must rebuild." And Evan blinked slowly, because he had never seen her speak in a voice that quiet or soft, and he wondered if saving her world somehow changed the way she saw him. And when he looked into her eyes, she turned away just slightly, as if she did not want him to see something she was hiding, and the room around them hummed with cold energy, as the frost patterns moved across the walls like living rivers, and Aria stood from her chair, her tall figure glowing faintly, as she walked toward the far side of the room where shining shards floated in the air. And she pressed her hand to them, and the room filled with cold light. And she said, "The elders wish to speak to you. They are afraid, they are confused, but you must answer them soon." And Evan felt a wave of nervousness, because he could imagine how the Coldborn elders must see him, a human who had touched the princess, survived her cold, traveled into the deepest tunnels, and helped seal an ancient spirit, and even now lay in her private bed, while she watched over him, and he said, "Do they think I am dangerous?" And Aria looked back at him, her expression unreadable, but her voice clear. "They think you are impossible, and impossible things are always feared." And Evan let out a slow breath, because he still had no idea how he had resisted her freezing touch, or how he had helped seal the ancient winter spirit. And Aria moved closer, her steps silent and smooth, and she placed her hand lightly on his forehead, and he felt the cold flow into him like fresh water, soothing the pain. And she said, "Your warmth still holds the echo of the spirit. It clings to you like a shadow of frost that refuses to fade. And we must understand it before it takes shape again." And Evan sat up despite the chill in his veins, and said, "Will it come back?" And she answered, "Everything ancient tries to come back, but we will not let it." And she took his arm, gently helping him stand, and the frost cover opened around him, letting him breathe more freely, as he followed her through the glowing chamber. And the tall crystal doors opened at her presence, revealing a long hall where guards stood on both sides, their glowing eyes fixed on Evan with disbelief and fear. And the guards lowered their heads as Aria passed, but they kept glancing at Evan, as if expecting him to melt, or explode, or freeze the hall. But Aria kept walking with confidence, her cold aura spreading like a calm storm, and the halls beyond echoed with whispers as palace workers watched them pass. And Evan felt hundreds of eyes on him, each filled with confusion or awe or fear. And Aria finally stopped before the great council chamber, doors huge slabs of frozen crystal carved with swirling symbols and ancient Coldborn runes. And the doors opened without a touch as the elders called them inside, and the room glowed with pale lights from long icicle-like lanterns, and at the center stood a circular platform surrounded by tall figures draped in heavy robes. and each elder had eyes brighter than starlight and skin colder than moonlit ice. And their voices blended into a single whisper as they said, "Bring the human forth." And Aria stepped onto the platform, guiding Evan gently, until he stood at the center under the cold glow, and the elders watched him silently for several breaths, and finally one spoke, its voice echoing. "The chamber, human, you stand before us, holding the warmth that fought the first winter, the warmth that did not freeze under the touch of our princess, the warmth that awakened the ancient ice." And Evan swallowed as the elder stepped closer, and its breath turned the air into falling flakes around them. And it said, "We must know why you are immune to her cold. No creature has ever touched her, and lived no creature has ever shared power with her, so what are you?" And Evan shook his head, firmly saying, "I am just human, and nothing more." And Aria stepped forward, her eyes glowing with quiet force, and she said, "He speaks truth, he did not know of his resistance, he did not plan it, and the ancient spirit reacted to him, not because he sought it, but because he carried something dormant, something hidden even from himself." And the elders murmured among themselves like a distant storm, and one stepped forward, raising a long, thin shard of crystal, and it placed the sharp point gently on Evan's arm, and he felt a sudden wave of cold energy flowing through him like icy water, searching every part of his body, and he grit his teeth, but did not fall. And the shard glowed brighter and brighter, until the elder pulled it back in shock, saying, "Impossible, the warmth inside him is bound to something ancient, something older than the eternal shard, something that remembers the first dawn before ice covered Virex 9. And the elders stepped back with wide eyes, and Aria stared at Evan with surprise she had never shown before. And the elder continued, "This human may carry the forgotten warmth of the first flame, the power that once balanced the first winter before the spirit rebelled." And Evan shook his head again, because he could not believe what they were saying, and Aria took his hand, guiding him gently from the center of the chamber. And she said, "He cannot remain under your testing, his body is still recovering, and I will not allow harm to come to him." And the elders hesitated, because no one had ever heard her speak with such emotion, but they finally stepped aside, and Aria led Evan out of the chamber, her cold aura pushing the doors closed behind them, and once the hall was quiet, Evan leaned against the wall, trying to understand everything, and Aria stood close, her eyes searching his face, and she said, "Human, your warmth is not normal. And now we must discover its origin, because if the spirit rises again, it will come for you first." And that truth weighed heavily on him as they walked deeper into the palace, to a part Evan had not seen before, a long spiraling tunnel of glowing crystal that pulsed like a heartbeat. And Aria placed her hand on the wall, and the ice parted, revealing hidden chamber, warm and dim, with strange floating lights and a soft glow that felt different from the rest of the palace. And she said, "This place is forbidden to all except the royal blood, and now you, because what we seek is hidden here." And she stepped inside, and Evan followed, feeling the warmth grow stronger, like the room itself welcomed him. And in the center of the chamber was a floating sphere of golden ice, unlike anything he had seen on Virex 9. And Aria whispered, "This is the shard of dawn, a relic of the first flame, the last piece of warmth left from the age before winter, when the first Coldborn shaped this world." And it glowed stronger as Evan stepped closer, and Aria watched him carefully, her silver eyes wide with something like wonder and fear mixed together. And she said, "If you carry even a spark of the first flame, we'll answer you." And Evan hesitated, but stepped forward and reached his hand toward the golden shard. And when his fingers touched it, the chamber burst with warm light that washed over everything, and Aria shielded her eyes as the warmth radiated outward, melting frost that had been there for centuries, and the shard pulsed like a living heart. And then the light faded, leaving Evan standing with golden sparks drifting around his hand like tiny suns, and Aria stared at him with a stunned expression, because she knew what this meant, and Evan felt a deep warmth inside him, stronger than before, and the shard whispered ancient words in a voice. Only he could hear, a voice that spoke of balance and fire, and a coming battle. And Aria stepped toward him slowly, and she said quietly, "Human, you truly hold the first flame, and that means the ancient spirit will rise again, stronger than before, and only you and I together can stop it." And Evan felt fear and strength mix inside him as he met her gaze, and she said, "Prepare yourself, warm bearer, for the storm will return, and it will seek you." And the chamber trembled slightly, as if the distant ice felt the awakening of the ancient warmth, and Evan knew that the war between flame and frost had only begun, and that his connection with Aria now bound their fates together far deeper than anything he had imagined. And Part 3 ends with the soft golden sparks fading around his hand, as Aria stands beside him, her cold presence mixing with his warmth, forming something new, something powerful, and something the ancient winter spirit will fear when it rises again.